Hello, everyone. This is Joel Canto, Research Assistant at the Barcelona Center for European Studies. And today we are going to present Dr. Alexia Fürnkranz-Prskawetz. I think this is the correct pronunciation. In order to better understand how the demographic changes in the European Union condition its society and its economics mainly. Dr. Alexia Fürnkranz-Prskawetz, she is mainly interested in the long-run population and economic development dynamics. Secondly, on the economic consequences of individual and population aging. She has also extensively studied social security systems and the heterogeneity of these aging populations. And interestingly, she has also delved into agent-based computational models in demography, which clearly allow the discipline to scientifically progress beyond the current existing methodologies. In the past, she has taken a wide range of research projects from the European Union, from the Jacob Foundation, and as well as the Austrian National Bank in order to better understand this demographic evolution and changes. Recently, she has been publishing about the COVID-19 lockdowns and the intensity, for instance, that how long should they take, right? This has been a topic of her study. She has almost 10,000 quotations from Google Scholar, and she deals on many different topics ranging from redistribution, women fertility, to economic dependency. Professor Fürnkranz is currently at the Technische Universität of Wien in Austria. She's a professor of mathematical economics there at the Institute of Statistics and Mathematical Methods. She also serves as the director of the Wittgenstein Center for Demography and Global Human Capital. She's the deputy director of the Vienna Institute of Demography at the Austrian Academy of Sciences. And last but not least, she also takes part in the International Institute for Applied System Analysis. And I think, having said that, I'm just going to give the floor to Professor Fürnkranz to deliver her lecture.
Many thanks for the invitation to give today's keynote lecture. And many thanks for the extremely nice introduction. And I'm gonna now share my screen, and I hope everything works. So let me just share it. Can you all see my screen and my mouse? Yes. And please let me know in case you cannot hear me or if I'm not clear enough. So I hope everything works well. And also many thanks for the opportunity to give this lecture via Zoom. As already introduced, I will give you an overview about the economic challenges of demographic change in the 21st century in Europe. I mean, clearly, this is a very broad topic, and I can just give you a little of a glimpse, on this. And it will be, of course, biased because it's based on my own research with colleagues of mine. And I'm also, of course, drawing on some other publications. But in particular, I think I really want to stress two important facts here. First of all, demographic change is quite different across different European countries. And I would like to stress a concept during my whole talk, which is called the generational economy, to better understand really these economic effects, or let me say challenges of demographic change. To start with, just an overview of my lecture today, and I have 7 parts. And my first part is really giving you a little bit of a background information on the demography, how it's at the moment, how we expect it to develop across Europe. And already mentioned, I really would like to stress, I think Europe is quite different across different countries. So the diversity in aging, that's the first point I would like to stress. Secondly, I will introduce in my lecture into a concept we are applying since about almost now 10 to 15 years in a worldwide consortium led by Ron Lee and Andy Mason. It's really this generational economy, how to better understand the economic challenges of demographic change. We do need to understand the life course, and we better need to understand how the life course interacts with institutions. And this is what the generational economy is helping us to do. And using this generational economy setup, I will dig in a little bit into the challenge on the welfare state. I will dig in, and this is very important, I think it's often forgotten, about private really contributions to the general economy. And then in point 5, I will use this generational economy to really show how different the challenges on the economy are in the European countries. And finally, point 6, I would really like to highlight our recent work where we also, based on this generational economy, we show an increasing intergenerational inequality. And finally, I'll just try to summarize just the highlights of my talk. And I'm looking forward, hopefully, to many discussions and questions. Now, let me start with my first topic, diversity in aging across Europe. So this is a very, I think, standard way of showing, how the population looks like. So you see an age pyramid. On the right-hand side, you see the females by age. On the left-hand side, you see the males by age. And basically what you see here, you see the bars give us the projections, and the lines give us like at the moment where we stand. And that's the whole EU population. And it's the EU population in 2019, that's the lines. And the bars are the EU population in 2070. So what can we observe here? First of all, what is clearly visible, I think, that we are not having a population pyramid anymore since years already. We have quite a distribution which is really heavily centered at the moment in 2019, still around the older working ages, but in the future everything will grow up in a sense like, and which means we really have more kind of an earn process, or we have more kind of a really like strong population in the elderly age groups. And we observe this, of course, for females and males at the same time. Just to give you a few numbers, what I've done is here, I look at something which is called the really demographic dependency ratio. Indeed, I will criticize the demographic dependency ratio later on in my lecture to show you we should use alternative dependency ratios to understand the economic challenges. But let me stick with a really demographic dependency ratio. So for example, in 2019, we would have about 3 people per every people in the 65 plus age group. And this will change to less than 2 people per every people in the 65 plus population. So we clearly see there's a change in the demographic age structure, of course, and this will have an implication also like, in the relation of the dependent versus the really kind of like working age population. And let me really draw your attention to this other dependency ratio here. We call this very old age dependency ratio, where we relate the 80 plus population to the population in the potential workforce. And what you see here, the increase is much relative. It's much bigger, even as the increase I've mentioned before, just relating the 65 plus to the working age population. So basically, you should get a feeling here from this figure, there's a clear kind of change in terms of the age structure. And how will this impact the economy? We will look in our lecture later on. But let me continue a little bit with demographic background. So, and let me highlight also, we just published this in May 2022. It's called the European Demographic Data Sheet. It's regularly published every second year by the Wittgenstein Center for Demography and Global Human Capital. It's everything online. You can find much more as I have time to present today. But basically, I'm using a map here. It's a map which shows you the population change in percentage from 2000 to 2021. And basically the colors indicate like the more you get into the red area, from yellow to the red area, the more negative. So these are population change is negative. And then the more you get in the dark blue area, population change is positive. So basically, I've highlighted this as the big East-West division in Europe. So what you observe here, you observe in a lot of Southern European countries, Central and Eastern European countries, you observe really that population change will be negative, or I should say has been negative, because it's from 2000 to 2021. And basically you see other areas which are pretty dark blue still in Northern Europe, in Western Europe, part of Southern Europe, where we still have population growth. But let me mention immediately, it's basically due to migration. Now I have summarized a little bit for you, what are the underlying factors? Basically, any demographic change has three underlying factors. It's fertility, mortality, and migration. And basically, what we do know, I mean, this population change, which we see here in colors across Europe, comes about by differences in fertility, differences in mortality, and differences in migration. So basically, we have low fertility generally, but very low fertility also recently in many of the Southern European and parts of Eastern and Southeastern Europe. And generally, we see really this decline in fertility across all regions in Europe, but they became much more pronounced now also in the Southeastern European countries. And recently, we even see it also in the Nordic countries, some fertility decline. Now, what about mortality? Mortality is something where we always think of really a story where we have improving survival, but indeed, what we do observe in many of the Central and Southeastern European countries here, we observe, and this is quite a negative sign, I think, we observe low life expectancy, high male-female life expectancy gaps, and generally, we also observe like almost a slowing of this mortality improvements in many regions. So this is really something also to be considered here as well. Now, I already mentioned this before, the big difference why we observe population still growing in some of the Western European countries, Southern European countries, and also here in the Nordic countries is also heavily due to migration, especially in the Western and Southern European countries. And basically, we have significant immigration flows to these countries, but, and now comes the story, in many of the really central and Southern East European countries, we not only observe low fertility, like in many European countries, but we observe in addition a huge out-migration flow from young educated people. So basically this is not only kind of red in terms of having negative population growth, it's really the color really mentions or gives you also the idea that these are really countries which have in addition, I think, quite also some problems in terms of brain drain by losing really the young educated people. Now, let me continue here just to convince you that migration is the story behind. I mean, here you only see the migration before we saw population change, which is the combination of all three factors, fertility, mortality, and migration. And here we just see the net migration. And clearly what you see is like, again, whatever is yellow or red means negative. I mean, migration in a sense, out migration. So net migration means if it's negative, you have more people going out of a country as coming in. And as I said before, the whole picture, how population change is different across Europe is heavily driven by these migration patterns, which are so different across Europe. So basically, the reason of out migration, just three of them I would like to highlight. There's an opportunity to live and work abroad, of course. That's why people leave their country. There are economic disparities in the origin countries. That's why people leave their country. And let us not forget what we have, of course, are currently in and observing, unfortunately, a lot of violent conflicts and upheavals. I mean, and this is also driving, of course, people out of their home countries. And just as a just kind of a picture, I mean, I've also plotted here the net migration percentage from 2000 to 2021. I mean, and in fact, you see countries like even Spain, where we are today, I mean, they have positive net migration, or Luxembourg extremely. While there are a lot of countries like Latvia, North Macedonia, Lithuania, Albania, Kosovo, even -33, So there's huge out-migration of these countries. And this, of course, will have an economic effect, which we cannot neglect. And I'm trying to summarize this here. So the economic challenge of emigration, which we observe in many of these Eastern and Southeastern European countries, are diverse. First of all, we will have less workers there. It's the young educated who leave the countries, which will have a negative impact on the gross domestic product, definitely. Something where we are always concerned is if we are losing human capital, and this is called the brain drain. It's really the immigrants from Central Eastern and Southeastern Europe have a higher education as the general population in this country. So it's really the educated who leave the country. Now, emigration, we do know from data, of course, lowers already the average productivity in these countries. And now, since we're talking in this lecture a lot about the economic challenges also of aging, I should also really emphasize here that we are losing, with these young people emigrating, we are losing the base, which is really, in a sense, holding up our social security systems in terms of their tax contribution. So there's a major challenge for healthcare, social security and pension systems in many of these countries already happening. There was an International Monetary Fund report who had wonderful, I think, investigations of this argument, and there are even more pressures in the future to be expected. So basically, we are really having this called vicious circle now in these countries of demographic, social, and economic decline. And this is something very different to other countries in Europe, where we at the moment still have the power, or I would say like the potential to really have also our economies still in a quite good situation, if we now accept, of course, during COVID or what happened now with supply chains, etc. But generally, we have a very different economic kind of like framework in the Western European countries and Northern European countries. Now, my last slide, and before we move on to the second part of my lecture, is about that you see the effect, I mean, on the really future workforce. I mean, there's huge discussion now in almost every country because the baby boom generation is retiring. Those cohorts who have been born earlier, I mean, these are the, like 1960s, they are the ones from the baby boom generation, they are starting to retire. And the lower fertility cohorts from the 1990s, etc., who are coming into the workforce, they are, of course, much lower in terms of number. So we are really losing the working age population in Europe at the moment, or let's say not losing, but it's just declining. So basically what you see here is two figures for Europe on the left, where we have assumed zero migration, and on the right, where we have assumed the medium or status quo migration scenario. And basically what you observe here, it's the projected change in the working age population between 2020 until 2060. And now the point is simply, if we would have zero migration, even countries like Spain, which had a population growth in the previous picture, would decline heavily. That's the point I want to make. I mean, it's really like migration is a key factor nowadays in demographic change in Europe. And also Italy, Austria, Germany, etc., and of course, many of the Central and Eastern European countries. Once we include the migration, like if it would continue as we have observed it during the last years, there would be, of course, a much better picture in terms of the demographic change. This is what the right-hand figure shows you, where we have assumed now the working age population. Keep in mind, this is not the total population, it's the working age population. So Spain had a really good kind of like color in the other figures, dark blue, but this was the total population change. Now, if we restrict it only to the working age population and look into the future, I mean, that's a figure where we look into the future until 2016, also Spain becomes now negative. Also, like the working age population, of course, shows a much stronger decline in many countries in Southern Europe, in Central Europe, as it has shown in the total population change. That's also important to keep in mind. Now, the question is, what about really the economic challenges of this demographic change, where I gave you just a brief overview now. Now, moving into these economic challenges, I would like to start with by introducing to a concept we have applied now over the last really years, decades, almost like at least 1.5 decades, which is called the generational economy. So basically what we are arguing is that the economic impact of a population reflects, in fact, I mean, the national variation in the life cycle, interactions with the national difference in the demographic change and the national institutional setup. So it's really this combination which we need to understand if we want to understand the economic challenges of our demographic future. Now, let me immediately move you into a picture which is one of the basic pictures like in this generational economy setup. And in fact, we have this for 186 countries worldwide now in this project, and you can download it also from the general NTA homepage. I'll give you several links later on, or from our European NTA, also Data Explorer. Let me walk you through this figure. So basically what you see here is you see on the x-axis, you see the age. On the y-axis, you see the euro per capita. So it's really kind of money, but per capita. Now, I have plotted here 2 lines. The first line, the black line, is labor income. So it's the average labor income. So it's per capita for each age group. And then I've also plotted the blue line, which is the average consumption per capita. Now, let me really be clear here. Consumption includes private consumption plus public consumption. Public consumption is education, health, for example. That's very important to keep in mind. Otherwise, you cannot really understand why these per capita lines look like in this way. Now, let me draw you on this generational economy concept. What we are now really wanting to depict in this figure is the following. There are phases in your life, and here for Austria 2015, for example, like from age 25 to age 60, where on average, I'm not saying like there's a lot of heterogeneity in these age groups, but on average, they are producing more because the black line is above the blue line as their needs are in this age group, which means we have something which we call a life cycle surplus. And now comes the point. This life cycle surplus has to be redistributed to the other phases in our economy, to people who are dependent. And who are these people who are dependent? It's first of all, it's the young. So when you are young, in generally, you consume more as you earn. In fact, you earn nothing, of course, when you're very young, and only when you start entering the labor force, you earn. And the consumption is increasing over time for these young people, because they are having more, of course, demand for education, which is good, I think. So this it's not a surprise, because I told you it's public plus private consumption. But this is something which we call now life cycle deficit, because it tells us the consumption is higher as what you generate in the economy. Now, and this is what most papers nowadays focus on when they talk about the challenge of aging, is the older ages. So what you see here, already at the age of 60, we have this crossing point. It's on average here in Austria. And in fact, that consumption is much higher as the labor income generated. And I mean, this increase in the consumption comes from elderly care demands, healthcare demand, and pensions who are going to finance this deficit later on, then, of course, in the old age. So this life cycle deficit in old age is really something hinting towards like there's a kind of a gap between what you, in a sense, need and what you can contribute. And keep in mind, these are per capita values. But what counts for the macroeconomy, if we multiply into these per capita values, the total population size in each age group. You will see it in a minute later on. Now, as a summary, I give you some slides where I have summarized the concept of the generational economy. So what we are saying in principle, it's this relation across generations. So young, old, working age potential population, which really drive or really determine in effect, in a sense, the impact on the economy. we see in every economy in the world, that's no exception, we see phases of dependence in young age and phases of dependence in old age. The point is, the difference comes about how these phases of dependence are financed. But it's almost like a physical law, what the figure I've shown you before. I didn't yet tell you how these are financed, these life cycle deficits in young and old age. But it's clear, it needs a redistribution in our economy. We need to redistribute from the life cycle surplus to those phases in the life where there are life cycle deficits. And this is where the countries are really differing, of course, across Europe. And the countries are different because they have different sizes in the different age groups. Now, what are the possibilities to really finance these dependent phases in your life? And basically, we distinguish between, in this generational economy setup, we distinguish between private transfers, public transfers, and asset-based reallocation. Let me start with the one which is the most common one we all know, I think the public transfers. We do know that much of the life cycle surplus, which is really kind of being paid into social security systems, is really in a sense used for health, for pensions, education. So this is the public transfer which redistributes from those who are paying into the system to those who are depending on the systems. Now, what we're extremely proud about it, and this is this generational economy set up, we are really uncovering something which is often not measured in general, or is never measured in national accounts, to be honest, and it's this private transfers. And private transfers, you will see later on, can be market or non-market transfers. It can be money transferred from parents to children. It can be time. And so private transfers, you will see, they account for a huge part of really sustaining our economies. And this is often something which is not measured and not valued. And this is so important. Our generational economy setup we are introducing here is taking care of this. And most importantly, if you think about gender differences, this is something you cannot ignore, these private transfers, to have a look at it. Finally, we have a third option, how we can redistribute our resources, and this is asset-based reallocation. Of course, there's a lot of savings in an economy. There are assets being held when you're working. And these are profits of firms also, which are distributed to households in our systems. And these are also helping, of course, to cover the life cycle deficits. And my focus in this lecture is mainly on public and private transfers. I would like to give you some insight. Now, again, just for your information, our project is called National Transfer Accounts. You can find it easily on the website. I'm having my slides. You can also have my slides after my talk, of course. And here are the links to this website. And let me really highlight, it's Ron Lee from the University of Berkeley and Andy Mason from the East-West Center, Hawaii, who have really started with this NTA about 15 years ago. And now we have 186 countries worldwide who are building up, really bringing age into national accounts. And we have our next global meeting in Paris in February 2023. Now, let me just also mention the Wittgenstein Center, and I was heavily involved, of course. This was one of my own projects with several partners in Europe. We have set up an NTA data explorer just for the European data. And the really nice thing is all these data are comparable because we're all using the same methodology. So you can really compare countries, and not only within Europe, but even across the world. So these are just some highlights. So basically what these national accounts do, they bring age into the national accounts, and we try to understand how is income generated, how it is redistributed, and how it is used. That's basically it. And now, this just a sample of a figure for Austria 2015. Keep in mind what we have seen before. Before we have already seen the consumption line. This was before it was blue, now it's orange. So that's the same line. And we have also seen, if you keep in mind, a black line, which was labor income. And in fact, this is now the yellow area. So basically, that's our labor income. So as you see, we have something now similar like we had before, but now we also understand how the life cycle deficit is financed. And I'll just start here to the left. So when you are young, you have, of course, more consumption as you can contribute to the economy, and you're heavily depending on private transfers. This, of course, mainly your parents, but also possibly your grandparents or other family members. And you're also depending to a certain extent of public transfers in terms of health, in terms of education, etc. So basically, this picture in young ages is very similar across many European countries. And in some countries, it's more private as public, but generally, it's a division of both. But what is very different across different European countries, how the old age is financed. So this is the case for Austria in 2015. What you observe here, that a large part of your dependency in old age in Austria is financed through public transfers. That's the turquoise area here. And the private transfers in old age are almost not existent in Austria. But what is existent also in Austria to some extent is asset-based reallocation. So during your working age, you have positive asset reallocations, which you also transfer into your old age. And basically, it's the asset income minus savings. And in fact, when it becomes negative in old age, it means that you're even saving when you're old. But be careful, these older age groups, we are missing the institution and households, unfortunately, in our data. We have only those who are still living at home, but we are not interviewing or have, in most of the surveys on which this data are based, we don't have institution and households included. But what it should show you really now, who is financing all this? It's the working age people. I mean, though they are working, they are the one who are really providing the private transfers. That's the turquoise. It's negative because they provide it. And also then they are really responsible for the main part of the public transfers. And keep in mind everything per capita. Okay, now as a last advertisement to the NTA, I'll just give you, that's the NTA Data Explorer. I'm not going to this slide, but please feel free. I mean, download data to your own studies. We are extremely happy if it's used, and we are happy also for questions if you need feedback. And I also make an advertisement of a book, and this is a very nice book which summarizes the general idea of this whole national transfer account, or let's call it generational economy. And basically, it's really like it really argues like how the future unfolds will depend on key actors in the generational economy. It will depend, and this is our constraints. So the demographic challenge has to be considered in conjunction how the governments, how families, how financial institutions, and many more of these constraints act. Otherwise, we cannot understand it. And this is what we try to demonstrate in this generational economy, to really look at these actors. How do they redistribute the resources in our economy? That's the point. Now, let me move on to the third part of my lecture. And the third part of my lecture really tries to use now this national transfer account methodology or generational economy. I use it synonymously, the same word. How can we use this to understand the challenge to our welfare state? And I'm doing this quite broad in the first figure. So the first figure should show you, again, we're still really only at per capita values so far. It shows you the per capita public transfers in Austria in 2015 across age groups. So you have age on the x-axis again, and you have again the money per capita, euro per capita on the y-axis. Already something I did not highlight in the other figures is shown here. It's this gender-specific, really kind of age schedule. And I've plotted here for men and for women separately the per capita public transfers. So basically what you see, orange is for women and turquoise is for men, like a little bit like blue. And the black line is men and women together. So basically we are differentiating also between benefits in kind, and benefits in cash. So benefits in kind is education, health, for example. Cash is pensions, for example, elderly care, unemployment insurance, family transfers, etc. So this is the total, and I've just highlighted also that the in-kind transfers are part also, and all the difference between the total and the in-kind are the cash transfers. But what I really would like to highlight here, what we observe here, that there are quite a lot of transfers to the young people in our society from the public sector. And this is almost independent of the gender. But once, I mean, they are starting in the labor force, we already see these gender differences. We see that, and I'm just focusing here on the total transfers, public transfers. We see that the total public transfers for female are higher, but it's mainly based on, it's the females who then have the family transfers. They get some childcare allowances, but it's also that they are more likely maybe to be in unemployment because they have maybe sometimes, I mean, work contracts which are not that long, and they are having not the highest security in the labor force, etc. While, I mean, the public transfer benefits to men are a little bit lower as for females. And now the picture reverses in old age. And this is really something which we have really to highlight all the time. I mean, the point, I mean, that females often contribute less during the working age because of this difficult combination of work and family, or also other kind of like disadvantages. I mean, this pays back negatively when you're in old age. And it's basically the benefits in old age are much higher for men per capita as for females, because pensions are depending on how much you did pay in during your life, the amount you did pay in, etc. And last but not least, it depends whether you have been employed at all or not. And so, as you see, I mean, they're always kind of like, I mean, even if you would just look at the working age population, you would get a very different picture as if you look at benefits also in old age. So we already see here the gender issue is something extremely important we can really discover or show with our data throughout all our figures. Now, let me move on. So far, I only captured the per capita values. But what is really important for our macroeconomy, what are the total values our public transfers generate in our economy? So to get this, we are multiplying all these per capita values now with the size of the number of people in each age group. And now you see a very colorful picture, and we call this an economic population pyramid. What you see here is on the right-hand side, you see women. On the left-hand side, you see men. And you see the total volume of public transfer benefits. And now we even differentiate by type, whether it's pensions, health, education, etc. And it's a total volume. So you see billion of euros. And now the following point. I should also say these fade black lines are the population numbers. And we multiply into our per capita values of these public transfers, these population numbers, and then you get exactly what you see here. So basically, pensions, it's a huge amount, of course, of the whole public transfers. I mean, we see it like here for the females, and we see it here for the males. And basically, I mean, the total volume is quite high. I mean, in these age groups, because here it's starting to get lower because there are less in this age group at the older ages. Now, what else you should see here is also, of course, education. I mean, which is very strongly, of course, focused in the younger age groups for men and for women. And now you see what I mentioned before, there are a lot of family allowances also coming to females and to children, which you see in these age groups. And unemployment, which often is discussed a lot in the public, also has, of course, a contribution to these public transfers, which you see in the gray line here. So basically what you can do with our data, you can really understand now what is the total volume of all these public transfers across different age groups. And now I hope it works. I would like to show an animation. You can see how this evolves over time. So what we have done is we are projecting this, and it's a really shift share analysis now in the animation, which comes up in a minute. So what we have done is we take these age profiles to be constant. So that's clearly not the future, because we do hope that these per capita age profiles will change. But let's keep them for the moment constant. But let's really, understand what having constant age profiles of public transfers, what the changing demographic structure implies. This is what the animation should tell you. We are starting in 2015, and in fact, here I'm taking all benefits you get together in the orange line, in the orange area, and then you also see the transfer contribution, how much you contribute. And what you should now see in a minute in the animation, that unfortunately, since we have less and less people in the working age groups, that the contribution base will shrink, and the benefits you get, which are mainly heavily centered in the upper age groups, this will grow over time. So get this imbalance. And this is done with our data, and it's now an animation which I hope it will work. So you should see this. Okay, so this was just a little animation and just to show you what you can do with our data. And I think it's really very intuitive. I think we have done this for many presentations also, like for the pension funds here in Austria and others. I think it's super important that they see this future if they would not change anything. Of course, we want them to change something, and we will discuss this more in detail during the next half an hour or a little bit less maybe during my lecture. Now, let me continue. I've just shown you the Austrian picture, but you might not be interested so much in Austria. That's why I have thought I have to show you generally, and this is independent now of the national transfer accounts. I've just chosen a really nice overview about, for example, the public spending for pensions across Europe. And basically what you see here, it's for many countries, that's from the OECD. And what you should see here, it's from Iceland to the left until Italy to the right. It's the public pension spending in percentage of the GDP. So what you see here, of course, there's a huge variety, and that's my point. There's a diversity, of course, which is behind this is, of course, the diversity of the population structure in many countries. We do know, for example, Italy has one of the oldest age structures in Europe. That's why this public spending are extremely high, of course, for Italy. But not everything is the population structure in this figure. So partly it's also, of course, how the pension systems is set up. But I mean, it really shows you, I think, that you have a really kind of really change or kind of a diversity in the pension spending percentage of GDP across the whole European countries. And you have 2.6% in Iceland, and you would have almost like, I mean, 15.6% now in Italy, for example. And for Spain, which you might be interested in, for 2070, it was about almost 11%. Let me say, it's always for the latest available data. And obviously, in 2021, they didn't have more actual data yet, the OECD report. That's why it's for 2017. But now there's also something which should really be seen positive. And this is on the right-hand side of my slide here. There's a recent study by Prof and Oz, two economists, and we do already observe this since the last couple of years. There is something happening among the pension system. We observe, and again, this is the OECD average. It's not in every country to the same extent, but what we observe is like we are pretty aware of this really kind of challenge of the pension system. And one point is this early retirement ages. And what is done in this paper by Prof and van Ours, they have looked at the average effective age of retirement over almost 5 decades, from 1970 to 2070s. And I think it's often neglected in the public that there is some change in some countries going on, and this is the average. So you see really like there was a turning point around the turn of the century, where we, after long decade or 3 decades of declining retirement ages, we observe increasing retirement ages among men and among females. I'm not saying that we're already there where we should be and that it's happening in every country. It's an OECD average, but there's a tendency towards accepting, I think, this pension really challenge. I mean, and people are starting, I mean, it's either the retirement age, you could change the benefit scheme, you could change the contribution rate, the eligibility, etc. There are a lot of options, but working longer in a kind of a society where we are also staying longer healthy, I think is definitely an option we have to take up. So this is just like as an overview. And let me give, before I move on to my fourth part of the lecture, A figure also where I would really like to highlight, besides the pension, I think the really big challenge for the future is the elderly care and the health care. How can we see this? What I've taken here, and I can just recommend it, is a wonderful report, and they are doing it every 2 years. So this is the 2021 aging report. Next year will be a new one. And in this aging report, what they are trying, I mean, it's huge, this report, I've drawn just one figure out of it, which I think is really making my point. It's the projected change in age-related expenditures from 2019 to 2070 by different expenditure types. And so what you see here are their percentage points of GDP, how it will change. What you should see here, so you have a lot of countries here for the EU, and basically we are starting here really, it's quite broad because we are starting here to the left, like from Greece. It's Greece, then we continue Estonia, then we have Portugal, and let me move to the right. To the right, we have, for example, Slovakia, Luxembourg, Slovenia, Malta, etc. But there's a general, even not going into detail, but there's a general picture you should see here. I mean that mainly it's really this green area and the orange area. So green is the long-term care, and the orange area is the health care, which is positive for all countries, which means there we will see the big increase in the future. And we also see, which I mentioned already before, there are some countries which are projected, if they continue with the pension reforms, for example, they have started with, they might even have a reduction in terms of the pension. While there are other countries here, as we do know, for example, Slovenia is a typical case, but Slovakia also, which have obviously not done enough or not prepared, in a sense, their pension systems to the extent not to further increase it. So these are possibly really the countries which have to establish much more reforms. But the overall picture I really wanted to give you here is really, it's like that the long-term care and the health care, they are in every European country to be projected to heavily increase. And in fact, I think we should focus our attention not only to pensions, but also to these other systems, which are extremely important in the future. Now, let me move to my fourth part of the lecture. It's about the importance of private transfers. So I've already highlighted that this is the biggest advantage I think I see also in our setup, that we are including not only public, but also private transfers. Let me give you a quick insight. What are private market transfers or private non-market transfers? So private market transfers means transfers going through the market. So these are basically monetary transfers of goods and services, and it's mainly from parents to children and from men to females. So basically, you have to imagine, like, I mean, a household living together is often the case that the male is the main earner and there's a transfer in the household. In terms of private transfers, it's just the opposite. It's mainly the transfer from females to males and the children. And it's really service and goods produced for their own consumption in the household, and they are measured with time use surveys, and we can value them. We can value the time input by the opportunity cost, for example, how much you would earn on the market if you would not, in a sense, have these private non-market transfers. So there are different measures, or you could also, the replacement method would be more that you value the time input. If you would have to employ someone taking care of this activity, for example, how much would a nanny cost? How much would someone cost helping you at the household? Or you do it with your own wage, then it would be the opportunity cost. But generally, the point I want to make is like private transfers are a huge amount in our economy. We should value them, and we should think there's no free lunch. I mean, my point is like we are all trying in many European countries. I think we still have really the potential of the workforce not yet exhausted. There are many females not being integrated. There are many foreigners not being integrated, migrants, and last but not least, of course, the elderly population. I mean, where we have also many of them who could or would or even work longer. So they are really once we put them or help them to get into the really workforce, I mean, there's a lot of time missing in terms of the other resource allocations, which has been taken up by private transfers. And this is something which we are always stressing, no free lunch in the economies. I mean, and that's why we have to think about how we should also help these private transfers to be taken care of with some help. Now, let me give you a quick overview here, and I'll do it in several steps. I would first give you per capita profiles separately for males and for females in terms of benefits and contribution of private market and private non-market transfers. Let me be here very kind of crude, and we can maybe talk more in the discussion later on. So basically what you see to the left, you see the benefits market, private market transfers. They are measured in euros per capita. And on the right-hand side, you see the contributions, private market contributions by gender. And here you see the age. Obviously, when you're young, you need a lot of private market transfers. You're a child, you're depending on basically your parents in terms of the private market transfers. And it's pretty much the same whether you're a female or a male child. Now, once you start working, you're much less depending on private market transfers because you're in the labor force. But, and this is really something to be highlighted here, I mean, this continues to decline heavily for males, but this is something, and again, it's for Austria, and we have this for many countries in Europe. But what you observe here, that females are starting to be, I mean, even here declines for females, but then they start to be dependent on private market transfers again. And that's basically showing up a clear division still in the Austrian economy between males being in a market-based work and females often only working part-time or working not at all and taking care of the children or the household, or together both. And then you see also, of course, when you're old, you also have some private market transfers. Contributions, it's the story now in inverted U shape. So you contribute mainly in terms of market private transfers when you're working. And basically it's the males, I mean, who contribute a lot. It's huge. I mean, if you look into this, how big it is, it's about 11,000 euros per capita. I mean, per year here on average. And it's much lower for females because they cannot, because they are obviously not in the market where and cannot have non-market monetary transfers. Now, let me have a look together with you on the non-market private transfers. And what we have done is we measured in time use, but then we have transferred it also to euros per capita. But it's really services you, as I mentioned before, you're giving in terms of time to others. And now what you see here, it's first of all the benefits. So basically, the most benefits, of course, come to the young children. I mean, they need time. They need time from, and it's basically they need time mainly from females and males, also from fathers, but mainly still from females. Now the benefits are much lower when you are in the working age population. So the non-market transfer, someone taking time for you, is much less, of course, once you're starting to become independent. But, and that's important, it's higher now for males as for females, just the other way around as the market private transfers. And now to the right-hand side, you see that, and this is really a figure which I really like to show quite often, it's this contribution to the non-market private transfers, which comes heavily from the females. And it's huge. And this is the point. I mean, it's really, and it's not accounted for. It's really important that our economy works, but it's not valued when these females are in old age later on. And I'll try now to show you a figure where I have just put together, in a sense, like the total private transfers, private market and non-market transfers, where I take the per capita values and multiply it again with the size of the age groups. And what you see here is the private market transfers. This was my first slide, and the private non-market transfers, the second slide. And you see the orange one is transfers received, and the green area is transfers paid. Basically, they should be the same. And you clearly see what I've told you before. Private market transfers mainly come from males, but they're mainly coming to children. The private non-market transfers mainly come from females and mainly come to the children. Now, just to give you a number, I mean, you can calculate this, and in fact, it's about, for private market transfer, about 70% of national income is really generated through private market transfers, and about 21% of a little bit less as 1/4 of national income is produced through the non-market transfers. And again, it's not valued. It's something really the amount it is produced in our economy. If this is taken away, I think we would have a lot of difficulties to sustain our future. Since I think I'm running a little bit out of time, I mean, what I would do is now, basically, I'll skip the next 3 figures, or maybe I'll just show you 1 figure, which might be of interest for you for Spain. So what I've done in this, so I'll skip this figure and go maybe immediately to this figure now to Spain. So what we have done here, and you can again do this for every country in Europe and for 186 countries across the world. So what you have seen, what you see here is basically the time value of transfers, and here it's in hours per day. And I just show you Spain, and over the age group, and to the left for females in Spain, and to the right for males in Spain. So basically the yellow one is the private non-market transfers, and the orange one is the private market transfers, and the green is the public transfers. Let me highlight first the children again. So basically a child needs on average about 8 hours, a little bit less later on 6 hours and so on, in terms of transfers, private transfers when you're young. So that's the children. They really need these private transfers, but they also need market transfers. And how can you imagine now these private market transfers? I mean, it's usually money that you transfer, but what we have done is we calculate it now into hours and say how many hours you would have to work to give this amount of private market transfers. So on average, you would have to work, maybe here it's about like an hour, and here maybe 2 hours to sustain these private market transfers to the children. And now what you see here, this is negative. This means you are producing really private non-market and private market transfers in the amount of about 4 to 5 hours. So you would have to work 4 to 5 hours on average just to provide, in a sense, like for these private transfers, in addition to your working time you have in the market, of course. So this is quite a heavily kind of burden, of course, we observe, but again, it's not valued. And now you see also like this transfers at the old age, what you see, everything is for females. And then you see what the females provide in terms of the market and non-market transfers to the elderly. So on average, they continue to work 2 hours a day, in a sense, like to really provide these transfers to the old people. And now let me highlight something. In Spain, it's really exceptional, like in Italy, from the age of 25 onwards for females, this kind of private non-market transfers, they never become positive. They always stay negative. They're always net contributors, the females, to these private non-market transfers. They really contribute. And now the males, of course, as you see, let me focus on the private non-market transfers. Here they also contribute to children, but once they're in working life, they contribute. In fact, sorry, I just said it wrong here. They're not contributing here. It's the children who receive the private non-market transfers. But what you see for the males in Spain, they always get private non-market transfers. They never contribute to it because they are never becoming negative. So whenever the yellow area is positive, it means you're contributing in a sense, not, but you're receiving. So here the yellow line really means you're receiving private non-market transfers when you're young, and you still receive it when you're working, and you still receive it when you're old. And this is amazing. I mean, compared to the females, they never receive private non-market transfers starting at age 25. The males never in a sense contribute in Spain in terms of this on average. There are exceptions, let me say, but on average they never contribute. And so I think this gender difference in our generational economy becomes extremely highlighted once you look at these private transfers. So this is really what I wanted to stress here. Okay, a lot of figures, so I should be careful not to overburden you with too many figures. And I will cut short a little bit now, maybe on this part. But let me just show you something what you can do with our data. The diversity of the generational economy across Europe. You can plot these figures for many European countries. We have done this for a selection of countries. It's 2010. We are working now to update the data to 2015. It's always a delay because we're using the consumer expenditure survey data and other data sources which have a delay of 5 years, because we use it from Eurostat, the really kind of the ones which are comparable across all European countries. So it's not that we are not aware that we are in 2022. It's just the point that the data are not available so fast. But what you should see here is just for the EU, 25 countries, and we have here Austria, Italy, Sweden, UK. Without going into detail, just looking at the picture, you see that the age profiles are quite distinct across or different across countries. And of course, to compare it, we scale everything to the income of the average 30 to 48-year-old and have it then in comparison, 49-year-old, and have it then all the other kind of labor incomes in relation to this. So we have a relative kind of value, otherwise we cannot compare it across the different countries. But you clearly see, variation of the consumption per capita in young age and old age, and you clearly see very different labor force institutions, labor force behavior in the different European countries. So you can really try to understand this with our data. Now, let me also give you a kind of a little insight what else you could do with our data. In fact, I mean, I told you in the beginning when I started my lecture, I will criticize demographic dependency ratios. And this is what I'm doing now in this figure. In fact, so what you see here on the x-axis, you see the demographic dependency ratio, which is defined as all the people who are lower or have an age less than 15 years and an age bigger than 65 in relation to all those between 16 and 64. This is called the demographic dependency ratio. It's used a lot, but it's used sometimes for wrong interpretation. It has nothing to do yet with the economic potential of an economy. It's just showing you the demographic structure. It might not be independent to the economic potential, but it's not a clear correlation. Why? Just look at, for example, a different indicator. Let's call it, we are arguing the really dependent population are the non-employed, and those who are really, in a sense, not dependent are the employed. We call this the employment-based dependency ratio. So we are not taking everyone who is here in this age groups lower than 15 and upper, but only those who are really non-employed. And there could be, in fact, some people who are not employed also in between. So this is a much more general indicator because it really says who in our economy is not employed. Independent of the age, we look at every age group. Similarly, here we look at every age group. It could very well be that there are some people below the age 16 or above the age 64 which are employed. So we're just looking independent of, we're looking for each age group, but we are having no fixed age borders. We let the characteristic employment define who is in the numerator and who is in the denominator. And now let me make you a point. So what you see, for example, the demographic dependency ratio, and it's an old paper of us I've used here for 2011, Germany and Italy have both in 2011 quite a high demographic dependency ratio. Now, Italy would even more diverge from Germany. So it would not be possibly on the same line anymore. But just to highlight my point, so from a demographic point of view, they would have here in 2011 have the same demographic dependency ratio, but they have a very total economic dependency ratio. That's what counts if we want to understand the economic challenge. Germany has a much lower employment-based dependency ratio as Italy, because we do know Italy had quite a high unemployment, had a very different kind of retirement age, etc. So my point is really you can use our data to get much more insight into the challenges of demographic change on our economy by using our indicators. And this is just this employment-based. And maybe I'm skipping now some of the slides because I should, I guess, finish in 5 minutes or 10. So I'm skipping a couple of slides now, but let me just, I will skip these slides and go to this table now. What you see here is basically we looked for several countries in Europe, how a demographic dependency ratio compares to employment dependency ratio. And then we have also another dependency ratio where we also use our national transfer account data, because keep in mind the employment dependency ratio takes in the numerator those who are not employed and takes in the denominator those who are employed. Now we are arguing you should also take account of the needs of people and the production possibilities of people, and not just count the number of people who are employed. You also want to know how much they earn, and you should not only take into account those who are not employed, the number, but also how much do they need. So we have needs weighted in a sense, also stronger these employment ratios with having the information on wages, on consumption needs, on wages, production possibilities. So it's a needs and a consumption weighted index. It's even having more economic kind of intuition behind it. And this is the NTA dependency ratio. And what we have then done is we really try to compare these 3 different indicators for different European countries. And for example, I mean, Spain had a quite high employment-based dependency ratio because of a high unemployment. We observe, for example, here, like, let me take Italy again as a case. I mean, it has quite, among all the employment-based ratio, also a high unemployment ratio and a high dependency ratio, because it has high consumption in old age. That's the point. So it's really like, I think the question you are posing, you want to answer, should determine the indicator you're using. If you want to understand, like, in a sense, like how you have to reform possibly your labor force kind of institutions, and employment-based dependency ratio is very well, I think, adapted to this. On the other hand, if you really want to understand more kind how you have to finance these life cycle deficits, take an NTA dependency ratio, because it tells us about the needs of people, not just the number of peoples, and it tells us about the also the production possibilities of people at every age. So this is something I wanted to highlight, and I'm skipping now. I would have also a figure where we even extend this, and we can calculate a fiscal support ratio, a pension support ratio, etc. It's the reverse of a dependency ratio, is a support ratio. And we can do this now for different institutions in our society, in our economy. The fiscal support ratio, for example, would relate all those who pay taxes, in a sense, those who support the others, to all those who benefit. And again, we can use our data for this. Or a pension support ratio would calculate the relation, all those who benefit from pensions, all those who pay into pensions to all those who benefit. And everything always weighted by the amount of the resources allocated across groups. So I'm going to skip this now and move to my almost last part now before I go to the summary, and that's the increasing intergenerational inequality. In recent works, in recent years, I mean, I've worked with colleagues, and I have not mentioned this, I should really mention this. All what you see today in my lecture is work together with many colleagues. I mean, let me just highlight Bernhard Hammer, who is one of the key persons also in this national transfer account in Europe. And many of the figures I'm presenting and studies are based on work with him or from him. And also a lot has been done, of course, with Sonja Spitzer, on which also the current now figures, which I will show you, are based on. So let me just now increasing intergenerational inequality. That's something also extremely important to highlight. What you see here is a figure where we have tried to investigate the effect of really, for example, the financial crisis. What might have been this impact on the mean individual net income between 2008 and 2017 for different age groups. And what you see here is basically, we have considered 3 age groups: the younger age group, 20 to 39, the 40 to 59 middle age group, and the old age group. And what this figure should show you, I mean, that basically, generally what we observe in Greece, all age groups had a negative impact. There was a decline. And this decline was the lowest for the oldest age group. Now what we observe in the other countries, there were declines for the younger age groups here, but the increase for the older age groups. And in fact, we also observe here the increase for the older age groups, though there are some countries where we also observe increase for the middle age groups. But the general pattern we wanted to make in our study is really that the income of the young decreased relative to the income of the older population. And I think that's really important to consider this. Now we went a step further in our paper and we're asking, why did this happen? What is the, I mean, we cannot really define all the mechanisms, but we try to decompose this. Is it because the young don't have employment? Or is it because the young have lower wages compared to the elderly? Or is it because the old have higher benefits? So what is it, what's behind this? And we have done this for all these 9 countries, which represent different welfare systems. And maybe I'll just show it you for one country, Austria, now. And I show it for men and for women now together. And basically what you see here is we have decomposed the total change in income. So for the young, 20 to 39, it was negative. So the dot is always the overall change of the income over this time period, 2008 to 2017. And here again, you see the elderly, the age group 60 plus, they have gained. And now we can decompose this. And let me just focus on the elderly. So basically what happened here is like that even though the share of beneficiaries has decreased among the elderly, which would be a sign that there were some good possibly reforms also, but what has happened, the benefit per beneficiary has increased. And also, the employment rates have increased among the elderly. So basically what we really decompose here is really understanding where does this come from? And I think it's this benefits per beneficiary which has heavily increased, while the income per employed has even decreased, but it's the benefits which have increased. I mean, and also the employment. There are more older people being employed. Now, what happened to this young? Just to stress this, in fact, they were negatively affected. Income per employed, so there was a decline in the income per employed, but there was also a decline in the employment rate. So not just the remuneration of employment, also the potential to be employed declined. And now as a last figure, it's I would show you now for Spain. Sorry, I wanted to show you also Spain. So this is just before I go to my last slide, the summary just for Spain. You see the young have been hit the worst. I think in all these 9 countries we have really investigated here. I think we were quite astonished also about the case in Spain. So what you see here, let me in Spain just focus on the young. So they were really negatively affected. So they had a negative, in a sense, impact here. And how it was composed, it's mainly like that the labor income, so the wages, I mean, relative in a sense to the others and over time decline, and also the labor market participation. So this is really something where we really have to think about how we can redesign our systems such that under circumstances of crisis, and we have a lot of crises happening, not just the financial crisis of 2008, it's the COVID crisis, the climate change, it's the war in Ukraine, etc. We need to have a resilient kind of reaction built into our institutions, not to have these disadvantages across different age groups as we observe it in these figures. Now, finally, my summary, and it can be only very, very good, my summary. So what I've tried to show you in my lecture is that there's a diversity in aging. So aging and general demographic change is quite diverse across Europe. There's no one size fits all policy across the countries and even within the countries. I could not highlight this, but a lot of colleagues of mine, they're looking at regional levels within countries, and sometimes the differences within countries across regions are at least or sometimes bigger as the differences across countries. Now, I wanted to really highlight and make a point that the economic life cycle, we need to understand like how the characteristics are different at different age groups in different societies. And here I can't only show you a snapshot, cross-sectional plots, but we are trying to build up how also these economic kind of characteristics change over time. And once we interlink this with the demographic change and the institutions, then we can understand the challenges where we have to really intervene or suggest reforms. I have shown you there is a role of the public sector. It's extremely important. The highlight in the future will be the healthcare and the elderly care. And I've also shown you something quite positive. I think that there are reforms going on the pension side. And of course, they need to be much more speedy, I think, but it's a positive sign. Another highlight of my lecture, I hope, was the private transfers, something which is only when you uncover something, it can be seen. That's our point. And so private transfers, we would like national accounts, not only to have them by age, as I've shown you here, or by gender, but also including, like in satellite accounts, also these private market and non-market transfers. And I've shown you in the end that there's a really burdensome, possibly worrisome, also kind of income inequality we might observe across age groups. And indeed, we have also done a study where we have shown not only across age groups, but across different family types, and across different socioeconomic groups. You can also use this as part of our NTA. And to conclude with, I really like, it's one of my favorite also economists in this economics of aging literature, Axel Börsch-Suppern, and it's quite an old quote, but still valid. The main danger of population aging is the lack of adaptation to a new demographic situation. I mean, we really have a momentum effect in terms of the institutions, and we projected much of the demographic change already decades ago. And now I think we are hit by the baby boom generation retiring. We are hit by all the crises coming up, and we are hit by, I think, all these global issues. And now we have a much more difficult situation as if we would have started to change things already earlier. But it's, as many people say, 5 minutes to 12 to really change something. Many thanks, and sorry for having taken possibly too long.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really insightful. And now we will open the round for questions.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, first of all, well, thank you, Joel, for allowing us to be part of this, and thank you, Professor Alexia, for the lecture. Many things have out of our interest here in class, but again, we are in a European politics session, and we focus very much on the role of the European Union and the different institutions. And I have lots of questions regarding the lecture, but I think I should focus to the ones that are interesting for our students, and I think that it can be useful for our course, if that's okay. You've mentioned finally in your highlights, and I will start with a question. I don't know if the guys have others, but I'll start with one, and afterwards I'll give the microphone to the floor. The idea, well, you've mentioned that the role of the public sector is extremely important in order to approach and face these demographic challenges, or the demographic impact. And what we would like to know is if you have information, or if you are aware of how is the European Union as an institution, or as a system, or as a political system approaching this? Is there an awareness of this in the European Union? Are European politicians and European let's say maybe the members of parliament working or debating on this? Because the feeling is that the European Union as a whole, it might have less competences in these particular issues. No, for example, taxation and this type of thing, it relies on member states. But this is an European challenge. So how can the European Union approach this challenge? And if you are aware of any of the strategies or the things that have been doing or have been happening in Brussels and in the European Court. This would be my first question, and then I will ask if there's some questions on the floor. Thank you very much.
I think it's a difficult question. Many thanks, and it's a very important question. I mean, to say, I'm not really involved so much in the decisions in Brussels or like on the European Union. I can just give you maybe some feedback from my own presentations and the feedback I got, and what I have the feeling at the moment. So first of all, I do believe, I mean, that the European Union as a union itself knows about this problem, because the European Union, and whenever you talk about, I think, demographic change, they have a now even division, I think, I mean, taking care of the demographic change and also trying to invite us and give lectures on these challenges also in terms of the public sector. So they're pretty aware of this. And the problem is, I think, exactly what you say, and I think it goes even deeper. It's basically, I think there are a lot of country-specific regulations which the European Union cannot intervene. And it's not even country-specific, it's regional-specific. Even within Austria, for example, I mean, there's a division in a sense, like the federal states have very different regulations sometimes as Austria as a country itself. So it's even within a country, I think it's super difficult. But where I think the most being done at the moment is also, I think, that we have to think as a European Union, we have migrants, I mean, across European states. And this is where we are trying really, and not we, I'm not, but I think where they are really trying in a sense, like, what does it mean? We have free labor mobility, but what does it mean for our social security systems, our healthcare systems? What does it mean? How can we protect people, I mean, who are living 20 years in this country, 5 years in this country, they retire in another country, they start education there, then they continue working there. So I think the biggest problem for the European Union, I think at the moment, is also not the biggest, but it's a problem also, one of them, which I've realized, is how can we transfer social security systems, kind of like the eligibility across countries, being aware that possibly you draw on benefits in another as where you have put in benefits. And this is something, I mean, I've realized there's a lot of discussion on this. Now, something else I would like to highlight, I mean, I've stressed a lot the elderly care system, and that's a typical example also where we observe nowadays, and I just know it from Austria, there are even now negotiations with Germany. We need about 80,000 more people, workers in the elderly care system, I mean, until 2030. And Germany has a similar problem, and now Austria is starting to Germany to initiate at the European level how we could stronger, in a sense, push the European Union also to accept migrants from non-EU countries for these sectors in the future, and even attract them. I mean, I think we are running out, I think, to be honest, even there are coming many of the elderly care kind of personnel who are helping in this sector from Eastern, Central, Eastern European countries, but they are also aging. They're aging even faster as we are aging. And now there's kind of really strong demand for many EU countries that we have to free the labor market, not just to the EU labor market, but to other countries. And like typical example, Australia is also attracting a lot of elderly care workers and hospital workers from Philippines to Australia. Even Japan, who was always like a closed country towards migration, is starting to attract migrants. So I think we, as a European Union, we have to think how we can sustain our elderly care system and healthcare system, I think, also with opening our labor market, but also opening then also kind of the eligibility to our social welfare state. We cannot just attract people without also thinking how to integrate them into our social systems. So this is just, I mean, very selected, I think, answers from my point, which come to my mind, but I have not done studies myself in this area. It's more what I've learned from discussing with others.
Thank you very much. Let me see if somebody has questions in the floor. I will stand up if you don't mind, so you won't see me because I have to get the microphone. Preguntes, dubtes al respecte, comentaris. Esteu familiaritzats amb això o no? Coneixíeu situacions semblants? No? I don't think they're quite shy, eh? If you are
I have a question actually. if no one's
well, so, there's some students they are at home, so I don't know if they want to ask questions. I see that some of them are following the lecture online. I don't know if some of them might have another question. If not, Joel, I think the floor will be yours. So.
Okay, someone has a question.
Joan Masdeu, yeah. Joan, go ahead. I didn't see you in class, Joan. What are you doing?
Yes, am I well heard?
Yeah.
Okay. With this diversity of demographic profiles across the European Union, I suppose this will require specific monetary policies for each country. Does this mean the euro is at an end? And what are the other demographic consequences of this?
I think, again, a very good question, and I'm possibly not the expert here on the monetary policy side, but again, I can just give you some feedback, which I know from people, I mean, who are working in this. So basically, I don't think that euro is at the end. I think just the opposite. I think it's not just, we should not only think European-wide, we should think worldwide. And I think we should really put all our effort to make the euro stronger, I think, even in the world, I think, as it is at the moment. And there's a lot happening now, I think, in central banks in the countries, but also in the European Central Bank, of course. And I mean, I do know of some studies who are arguing that the monetary policies are heavily also depending on the age structure of the countries, because, I mean, investment, saving behavior, I mean, these are very, and it's extremely important. It's also, of course, very closely related to the demographic structure in many countries. And I think monetary policies should take this into account. But I think, to be honest, I mean, the monetary policies, demographic change is one aspect, but I do believe, I think that at the moment, climate change and also, of course, the war we're observing, at least as important, I think, to really determine the monetary policies we are currently in, because we're in a global world. And I think this is not only being affected by our demographic change, by the way, but the monetary policy in Europe is also affected, I think, by the demographic structure across the world. And I think, as an example, just let me give, there's something in economy where there's the argument that maybe in the future we cannot invest anymore in young countries, because also those countries where we invested our money are growing older. So does it mean now that the interest rates, I mean, at the moment we are trying to keep them up again or to increase them again? Does it mean in the future they will fall again? I mean, what are the future outlooks? I think if we don't have investment possibilities anymore, I mean, it's not just investing in Europe, we are investing our money also, of course, in other economies. The other point is also, like, what about if we are increasing our debts now because we are running unsustainable social security systems? I mean, the whole time pass of the debt in the future, which we are generating at the moment, might, of course, have a very strong effect on monetary policy. So indirect effects are clearly visible. And I think it's there are studies already around. I mean, I'm not doing my research myself, but there's another study which is called the asset market meltdown hypothesis, which was quite prominent in the literature about 10 years ago. I mean, the argument was like that the whole asset market is heavily influenced by the demographic change, because what happened, the baby boom generation was the first generation starting to acquire more risky assets. I mean, to be really active on the stock market. Now they are retiring, they're making their monies liquid, and there's not enough demand for it. I mean, this will have an impact on the monetary policy as well. And of course, I mean, I could continue, I think, besides demography, the whole digitalization and everything might have a really strong impact also on whether we are producing capital or labor intensive, and how this will change in the future and our technologies. I think it's a super, I mean, I have colleagues of mine here in my group at the university who are generally doing monetary economics and monetary policies independent of demography. And my feeling is that demography is one aspect, but there's so many other things intervening now. I'm not sure if I could answer a little bit where I personally see that demography plays a role, but I cannot really say that demography is the biggest role. But what I would definitely like to say, I would be really in favor of having a more stronger EU kind of euro as having no euro anymore.
There is a question in the chat. Essentially, they're asking the most urgent strategy the European Union should make in order to face this demographic problem or this demographic challenge. If there is a specific strategy or what is, in your opinion, the urgent strategy which can European Union make to face this problem?
Okay. Super difficult question, to be honest. I mean, so it's again, of course, I'm biased. I mean, I'm living in a country where we have a lot of reforms or let me say a lot of discussion on this. And I mean, what my feeling is, I mean, what the European Union can do, I think, in terms of this is, I mean, we really should highlight, I think, that there's a potential of work which is not used. And we are trying to do this in our country ourselves. But I think the European Union can do this even more. And I think there are kind of European-wide policies in terms of family policies, in terms of pension, healthcare policies. So I think the European Union has kind of like best practice examples. And I mean, how they are implemented in the countries heavily is, of course, depending on the political kind of landscape in these countries. But at least working out these best practice policies is something what the European Union should do. That's my feeling. And as I said before, I think my feeling is that in the labor market mobility and in this labor market potential we have, I think the European Union can have many more kind of like, how should I say, nudging. That's how we call it in economics. To really can put incentives, I mean, that it becomes easier. And I mean, to really kind of integrate people into the economies and really have these flows across countries also and support this. I think this is for me something where the European Union can help. And in fact, I should also say I had a meeting just 2 days ago with the UNFPA, they're worldwide. But what they are doing is they're really going now to many European countries who have the shrinkage of the population at the moment. And it's amazing. I mean, in many of these countries, even in Europe, I mean, they told us, like, when you talk here to the governments in terms of family policies, in terms of health policies, etc., they're far behind standards and far behind realizing this or accepting this. And I do have myself in several courses, I have many people also from Southern European or Southeast, I should say, Serbia and so on, at the Diplomatic Academy, for example. And they have a fly out of the young educated people. And I think what the EU can do is, I think it can support these countries, possibly also with some costs being really invested there, to really keep young people in these countries, to give them an option, to give them really a future. I think this is where the EU can really work also, that we are helping also countries within the European Union, in a sense, to develop and not to, in a sense, like to de-develop, I think, what's happening at the moment. But again, I think it's really, and I think this is clear, I think the European Union is fighting against many country and regional specific policies, politics, streams we are observing, I think, in difficult situations. But nevertheless, it's the European Union who should work out best practice policies and try to not enforce, it's the wrong word, to nudge really the regions and countries in terms also of transfers given to these countries. I mean, I think to really help them, I think.
Joel, I think it's your turn. Oh, well, yeah, can the migration be part of the solution? That's the question.
Yeah, let me be honest. I think there are very important points when we talk about migration. First of all, I think I would definitely say, like, we should have open borders. We should try to attract really qualified people. We should try to attract, of course, refugees. It's another story. We really should accept them and should help them to be integrated. But we should really, like, I think we have been far behind, like, I think the Canada or the US in terms of attracting people. We're really making sometimes it really difficult for people to really settle down, to be integrated, not just in the labor market, but also in the society. So I think we have to start really, really taking this honest and really try to do much more in terms of integration in all spheres of our social and economic life in terms of migrants. However, and this is a very important point, I don't think that migration will be the solution, because also migrants are aging, also migrants adapt in a sense to the kind of host country in terms of their fertility behavior, etc. And so, and many migrants, of course, they might also go back to their countries, they might send remittances, etc. So I think migrants, we do need them, we should integrate them, we should have a more friendly attitude, but I don't think that they would solve the problem of aging. I mean, and I'm saying problem, the challenge of aging, because as we observe in all our data so far, at least in the second generation, then continuing, they are adapting, I think, also in terms of all their demographic behavior, etc. And last but not least, I mean, they also should get out what they pay into the social security system. They should not just finance us, should not be just only net contributions from migrants. They also take out something. And I think this is why I'm saying in the long run, it's not a solution. In the long run, my solution would be in a sense like to have a combination. We should, of course, I mean, foster migrants and let them integrate, because it helps us to better, in a sense, manage the future. But I think extremely important, we have to have structural reforms in many of our systems. And we really have to have the incentive that people accept these reforms. I mean, there's the argument like that we have many reforms where half of the people escape the reforms. I mean, they do it through different pathways. I mean, and this is something we really have to work on. Why are people, in a sense, not taking up, for example, many of the prevention measures of healthcare we offer, or why are people not really, or maybe we're offering not enough continued education? So my point is also, I think it's like we have a lot of construction areas still in our systems where we also have to work on. So that's why I'm always arguing migration is something I'm totally behind it. It should be open, but it's not the solution to say we don't have to reform anything else. It's in parallel. We have to do the reforms as well, because migrants are becoming natives. That's what we want.
Ara sí, Joel, yo creo. I think it's...
Yeah, I just wanted like to follow up actually on this last question. And I would like, I don't know if you could like elaborate on the particular case of Austria, for instance, where there is this radical right party, which is the Party for Freedom. So how does the existence of this kind of political platforms that link immigration with some conspiracy theories, such as the Great Replacement and stuff, complicate this potential patch or fix that could be migration? Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm not a political economist and not a political scientist, so I can only tell you from my own experience by living in Austria. And basically, you're totally right to say this. I think it would, many things would be easier if they would not, I mean, they're not in the government anymore, but they're still, of course, in the parliament, and they have, of course, quite some power. But what I would argue, in a sense, like, we really have, I mean, how should I say? I mean, we have elections, and I think I'm super happy we are democratic, and I mean, we have elections, and I think it's super important, I think, to give the free opinion and free possibilities to everyone. But we really have to, also as researchers, we really have to give science research-based evidence. And I think they're saying many things, the right parties, which are simply not correct. And I mean, we have recently also got a request by a newspaper whether it's correct what they're saying. They're telling like almost like, I'm not sure, I'm just now possibly inventing a number, but like that 70% or something will be just immigrants if it continues like this, because they have such high fertility and we have such low fertility. So they are doing alternative projections to the projections Statistics Austria is doing. So, and this is crazy because they are assuming fertility among migrants is much too high. And I think they are assuming things which are just not correct. They are applying methodologies which are not correct. So this is where I, as a scientist, say that's now the time, I think, where I can intervene just from a science-based argument, that I'm saying they're basing their arguments on an evidence which is scientifically incorrect. I'm hoping that the public listens to us as well. And I think this is what we are trying to do. And I fully agree. I think it was especially the time before the current government, which was super difficult because they were in the government, the right-wing party. Now they're in opposition. And we have the Green Party and the Social and the Conservative Party. And it's good in a sense, like to have kind of a little bit more of an more openness through the Green Party, also in the parliament. But generally, I think it's we have to be honest, and I'm guessing this is in many other countries, as we observe nowadays also, that the more crisis we have, the more disadvantaged people feel, the more they lose, in a sense, like the more they will possibly flight away from the kind of standard parties to these parties which find someone who could be the culprit of all this and who could be accused for it. And that's what the right-wing party is doing all the time. I think in Austria, they are really putting a lot of the problems on the migrants, which is just not true. And this is what we as scientists, as I just gave you as an example, it's, I mean, using wrong population projections and saying Austria is then only consisting of migrants, it's something so wrong in a sense, like, because they are not accounting for correct assumptions. That's what I can do. Or I think also trying, I mean, to highlight over and over again how much our kind of wealth in our society also depends on the migrants. This is also what we are trying, or a lot of arguments like migrants are taking more out of the public coffers as they're putting in. There are all these kind of arguments from right-wing parties, which we as scientists have to show that they are not wrong, or they are possibly only going to one part or a very small part. And I think this is what we have to do. But as long as inequality, and this is my point, I guess, and again, I'm not a political scientist, but my feeling is the more inequality is on rise, the more we will spur such kind of really arguments. And this is why I'm always saying any reform we can do to reduce inequality will help us also to reduce possibly these negative attitudes which are growing and extending.
Okay, I think here we don't have any more questions. I don't know, we should get the room ready for the next course. So I just want to thank you for the lecture. Thank you for your answers. I think the lecture will be very useful for us, at least for to frame a little bit what can be done and what challenges the union as a political system and as a system that has to produce results and provide answers needs to face. And yeah, basically that's it. I want to thank you with a round of applause from the class. Thank you very much, Professor.
Many thanks for inviting me, and many thanks for listening to me. And I'm happy if there are any questions coming up, just feel free to send me an email. It's on the first slide, is my email address.
Okay, and will we have the presentation?
Yes, yeah, send it already.
Yes,
okay.
I will resend it to you.
Okay, thank you, Joel. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All the best. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.